So we look at basic percentages, how we make percentage changes, a little bit about compound interest, and then moving on to present value and the time value of money. So some basic percentages first. So percent means out of 100. So for every 100, how many units are we talking about? So to write a percentage, we can express it as a fraction of that percentage over 100. So that would make most sense. If it was 50%, we would express it as 50 over 100, which is a half. So we can cancel it down. Oops, too fast. So if we look at each of those, we express a percentage over 100, and then we simplified it and expressed it as a fraction. But we know that at any point we can put those fractions into a calculator and divide them, and we'd get a decimal answer. If we look at the last one is 7.5%, we've got to be careful that we express that as 7.5, not as 75. So whenever we want to express it as a fraction, put the number over 100. So how do we make it into a decimal? Well, we again essentially divide by 100. And you will notice that the first two digits of the decimal result represents the percentage. So after a while, you can look at a decimal number and see straight away that that first one is 46 because it's 0.46. But look at the 7%. We have to be careful there because we must not see that as 0.7 because that would be 70%. 0.07 is 7%. 0.007 would be 0.7 of 1%. In fact, there we see 0.002 is 0.2 of 1%. So the first two digits after the decimal point are how many percent we're talking about. So if we start with a fraction, we can simply convert it into a percentage by multiplying by 100. That would make most sense if the fraction was a half. We multiplied it by 100, we would get 50%. So here's just some examples of that. So to make a fraction into a percentage, multiply it by 100. We can do the same thing with decimals. So we take the decimal, multiply it by 100, and that converts it into a percent. So I jumped ahead there. Okay, so 0.08 is 8% after it's been multiplied by 100. So we can also do this with a calculator. So for instance, if we wanted to convert 5/16 into a decimal, we would divide 5 by 16 and then multiply the result by 100. The last one there is where we've got more than 100%. So we have to convert it into a top-heavy fraction. We multiply 1 by 8 and add 5, 13 over 8, and then multiply it out. So if it's more than 1, then we're going to have more than 100%. So this is something we often have to do, work out one number as a percentage of the other. So for instance, Petra has earned 80 pence in her account, and we would quite like to know what percent interest did she receive. That is something we need to do in real life. First, we need to put them in the same unit. So either we need to express 80 pence in pounds, which would be 0.8, or we express 32 pounds in pennies. But either way, we have to be consistent. Okay, so in this case, we're converting the 32 pounds into pennies. And now, to work out what percent the interest is, we divide the 80 by the 3,200. And that's going to give us 1/40th. So that's just a simpler fraction, but it's not really a fraction we want. We want a decimal. We want a percentage is what I meant to say. So we multiply that, as we've already seen, by 100, and we get this, and then, but of course we would do this on the calculator really. So 2.5%. 80 pence represents 2.5% of £32. So what if we wanted to find 15% of 90? 15% of 90, that's really 15 over 100 times 90, because we know that every percentage can be expressed over 100. So we put 15 over 100 and multiply by 90. And that's going to tell us it's 13.5. And again, that would work most well with, if we needed to find 50% of 90, we'd have 50 over 100, which is the same as a half, times 90 would give us 45. Often it's good to dry run with 50% and a half. You can just make sure that you've got the right approach. What's 4% of 9? Well, again, and then using decimals, we're going to find 4% of 9. We know that 4% can be expressed as 0.04. Remember, the first two digits after the decimal point tells you how many percent we're talking about. So 3.6 is 4% of 90. Here's another example, and here's another example. And remember the one at the end, 1.5% is 0.015%. So here's some practice questions. So you might want to stop this now and do some practice ones, and on the next screen there are the answers. Okay, now we're going to look at percentage changes. So sometimes an amount changes and we want to know how much that increase or decrease has varied from the original amount. So we want to know the percent increase or the percent decrease. So if it's a percent increase, then we divide the actual increase by the original amount. We always divide by the original amount, not the new amount, but the original amount. The original amount is always considered to be 100%. And the decrease is just a mirror image of that. So actual decrease as a fraction of the original amount. So another way of looking at it is the new value minus the old value over the original. Now, this will be a positive value if there's a plane going over. This will be a positive value if it's been an increase. So if the new value is bigger than the old value. That will give you a negative value if it's decreased, but that's okay because we would interpret a negative percentage increase as a decrease. Right, let's take an example. Let's find a percentage change. So a washing machine originally cost £289. Its price was decreased to £195. What's the percentage decrease in price? Well, the actual decrease in price will be 289 minus 195. And now we want to see that decrease as a percent of the original amount, always the original amount. So it'll be 94 divided by 289. But we want a percentage, so we're going to multiply that fraction by 100. That will give us a percentage decrease. A baby's weight. Baby weighs 3.5 kilos at birth, 6 weeks later. It weighs 4.2. What is the percentage increase in weight? Well, we need to subtract the old weight from the new weight. That gives us an actual increase of 0.7. So when we say actual increase, we mean in the actual units. And then to make it a percentage, we divide by the original amount. Remember, we always divide by the original amount. So multiply by 100 to get it in percentage terms. So 20% increase. All t-shirts were £25, now they're 17%. What is the percentage decrease? So, as before, we find the actual decrease in price. So they've actually gone down by £8, and then we're going to divide 0.8 by the original price. Always the original price. So that's a 32% decrease. And one more. Shopkeeper buys bars of chocolate at 32 pence, sells them for 50. What is her percentage profit? So we need to subtract 32 from 50. So she's actually making 18 pence on each bar. And what's that as a percentage? Well, we divide by the original amount, multiply by 100, and there we have it. 56%, 56.25 profit margin on that bar of chocolate. I think we've got the idea there now. Oh yeah, just a point to make sure the units are the same. So this was a 56p decrease. When we're finding that as a percent of the original amount, we must make the units the same. So they both need to be in pounds, or they both need to be in pennies. So let's do something slightly different. Now we want to take a value and increase it by 20% or decrease it by 20%. So there's two ways of doing this. So if we want to increase £180 by 20%, we can either find 20% and add it to the original amount. So here we are, 180 times 20%, which I've expressed as a decimal. 0.20 is the same as 20%. And if we put 20 over 100, we will get 0.20. So that's the fast way of calculating percentages. And add it to the original, we get 216. So that's all very well and good. Not particularly sophisticated way of doing it, but it works. The other method is, if we're adding 20%, we are going to end up with 120%. So if we know the original amount, which is 180, we can simply say, I want to know what 120% of that is, because that's the same thing as adding 20%. So I'm multiplying 180 by 1.20. So multiplying it by the 1 keeps the 180, and the 0.20 adds 20%, all in one transaction. So 1.2 times 180 is 216, same price. So how do we increase £50 by 60%? We'll think about that. Right, so we're going to, it's the same thing as multiplying £50 by 160%. So 1.6 times 50 is the same thing as finding 60% and adding it. Again, the 1% retains the full £50, the 0.6 adds the £30 to it. Increase 24 by 35%. Yep, hopefully you got it. We're going to multiply that by 1.35. Increase that by 17.5%. That will be the same as multiplying it by 1.175. And that will be multiplying it by 1.025. Remember, 2.5% is expressed as 0.025. If we had the 2 in that column, it would be 25%. So, quick one, value of Frank's house has gone up by 20% in 3 years. If the house was worth 150,000 3 years ago, how much is it worth now? Well, we just multiply 150,000 by 120%, which is the same as multiplying by 1.2, 180 pounds. So what about percentage decreasing? So similar kind of thing, we want to decrease 150 pounds by 30%. So we can either do it the unsophisticated way, but perfectly valid. We can find 30% of 150, which equals 45, and we can subtract it. So there we are, we get 105. That's fine. The other method is to note that if we subtract 30%, what we end up with is 70% of the original. So if we simply find 70% of the original, that's the same as subtracting 30%. So we get the same value. So 150 times 70% is 105. So some other examples. Decrease 65 by 20%. We're going to multiply 65 by 0.8. Some other examples. Oops. So you see, if we're decreasing by 95%, that's the big decrease. What's left is 5%. So we just need to find 5% of that number, which is £78.50. So an iPod, originally costing £75, is reduced by £40 in the sale. What is its sale value? We can just multiply the original value by 60%. And there it is, £45. So here's some practice questions, and the answers on the next page. So you might just want to freeze this for a little while and have some practice.